December 1944. A makeshift field hospital stands near Diekirch, Luxembourg. Snow falls on canvas tents, and the cold cuts through heavy woolen blankets. Inside, 150 wounded soldiers lie on cots, their breathing heavy in the dark. The sound of artillery echoes in the distance. It grows louder every hour. German artillery shells are now hitting within 500 yards of the clearing. The front line is less than 1 mile away, and the enemy advance shows no signs of slowing down. A young medical officer drops a clipboard, his hands shaking as the floor rattles from another impact. The order to evacuate has just arrived, but there are only 4 ambulances available. A brutal choice must be made immediately. General Patton will soon arrive to answer the question of what happens when a doctor refuses to leave her men behind. This is the story of what a surgeon did when she could only evacuate 32 of 150 patients, and decided to stay with the 118 left behind. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We tell the World War II stories that show what happens when the plan dies and the soldiers don't. Major Catherine O'Brien was 35 years old, a skilled chief surgeon from Boston, Massachusetts, serving with the American 3rd Army Medical Corps. Before the war, she had a quiet life, working long hours in clean modern city hospitals and planning a future free from chaos. She enlisted because she believed her hands could save the men who fought the battles. But the brutal reality of the European theater quickly stripped away any romantic notions of military glory. She had already seen too much blood, too many shattered limbs, and the heavy toll of cold winter campaigns that left young soldiers broken. Now, responsible for a temporary field clinic packed with casualties, she found herself trapped in a frozen corner of Luxembourg. Holding a clipboard that carried the power of life and death, the man advancing toward her position was Captain Hans Richter, a 38-year-old German commander leading an armored vanguard out of the Ardennes forest. Born into an old Prussian military family, he carried himself with an unearned privilege that showed in his custom-tailored winter uniform, his perfectly polished leather boots, and the gleaming iron cross pinned neatly to his collar. Richter believed completely in the strict rules of total warfare, convinced that the German advance would sweep the Americans back to the sea without delay. To him, anything left in the path of his panzers was either a resource to be seized or an obstacle to be crushed under iron treads. He moved forward through the snow, confident that his sudden winter offensive would give him complete control over the valley and everyone trapped inside it. By the middle of December 1944, the situation across the European theater had taken a sudden and terrifying turn. The Allied advance toward the Rhine had slowed to a crawl during the autumn months, bogged down by muddy roads, freezing temperatures, and extended supply lines that stretched all the way back to the coast of France. Many senior commanders believed the German army was completely broken, capable only of a desperate defense within their own borders. This overconfidence created a dangerous vulnerability along the Ardennes sector, a heavily forested and mountainous border region that was viewed as a quiet zone. The line there was held by exhausted divisions, refitting after heavy fighting, or green troops who had never seen combat. No one expected a counterattack, and certainly not an offensive on a massive scale. When 3 German armies struck the thin American lines on the morning of December 16th, the surprise was absolute. The enemy used heavy fog and low clouds to ground the Allied air forces, allowing panzer columns to slice deep into the American positions. Communication networks shattered instantly. Small units found themselves isolated in the snow, cut off from reinforcements, and forced to retreat or stand and die in place. In the chaos of the opening days of the Bulge, regular procedures dissolved. Field clinics that were supposed to operate miles behind the safety of the front lines suddenly found themselves directly in the path of the German advance. Many officers in charge of auxiliary units panicked, abandoning equipment and retreating in disorder, without waiting for official authorization from headquarters. The entire sector was collapsing into a nightmare of confusion, cold, and scattered retreats. The thin line between an orderly evacuation and a total rout depended entirely on the individuals left to face the incoming tanks alone. The 4 trucks idled in the falling snow, their tailpipes blowing thick white plumes into the freezing air. Major O'Brien stood near the tailgates, holding a roster containing 150 names. Her medical staff waited for the decision. A young lieutenant from the incoming combat unit stepped into the triage tent, wiping frost from his goggles. "We have 10 minutes, Major," he said. "The Germans just cleared the ridge. Their shells are landing in the valley. We have to clear out right now." O'Brien looked down at the paper, then back at the rows of canvas cots. The mathematics were clear. 32 seats. 150 men. "We are not leaving the casualties who cannot move," O'Brien said. "Load the 32 post-operative cases who will die without the machines at the rear base. The rest stay here." The lieutenant stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You cannot stay here, Major. The orders are to abandon the position. If you stay, you will be captured or killed. The Germans are not checking medical tags today. The regulations state that a protected field facility must remain with its non-ambulatory wounded if evacuation capacity is exceeded." O'Brien answered, her voice steady. "I am the chief surgeon. My station is with the patients who cannot walk." A young private from the 28th Infantry Division reached out from his cot, his fingers catching the sleeve of her wool coat. "Doc, please," he whispered, "don't leave me behind. They told us what happened at Malmedy. Don't leave us." For the SS O'Brien knelt beside the cot, taking the soldier's cold hand between both of her own. "I am not leaving you, son," she said. "The ambulances are taking the men who need immediate surgery in the rear. I am staying right here in this tent with you. The Germans will respect the Red Cross flag. You will be a prisoner, but you will stay alive. I give you my word." She stood up and turned back to her staff, her face pale but set. "The first 32 names on the critical list," she ordered. "Then the rest of the trucks pull out. Anyone who wants to get on those trucks has my permission to leave." None of the 20 medical staff moved toward the vehicles. They remained by the cots, preparing to face the winter woods and whatever emerged from them. The engines roared as the 4 ambulances pulled away, their tires spinning in the deep slush before finding traction on the road. The sound of their departure faded into the heavy gray fog, leaving the field hospital completely isolated. The distant rumble of the panzers grew louder, rattling the metal surgical instruments on the tray. O'Brien walked back to the center of the main tent, picked up her stethoscope, and waited. The report detailing the abandonment of the facility and the surgeon, who refused her seat, reached Patton's headquarters within the hour. Patton's jeep pulled up to the clearing where the temporary camp had been established after the liberation. 4 stars gleamed on his helmet, and the ivory-handled revolvers rested against his hips. The general walked into the command tent unannounced. The staff officers snapped to attention immediately, the sudden silence heavy in the room. Patton did not tell them to rest. He kept his gloves on, his eyes fixed on the reports spread across the table. His voice was quiet, but it carried to the furthest corner of the canvas structure. He called the field commander forward. "Tell me about the surgeon at Diekirch," Patton said. The officer cleared his throat, his posture rigid. "Major O'Brien refused her evacuation seat, sir. She remained behind with 118 non-ambulatory wounded when the perimeter collapsed." Patton studied him. "Did she disobey a direct order to withdraw?" "She stayed to maintain the medical facility under the Geneva Convention," the officer answered. "The Germans honored the flag. The men survived until our counterattack reached them 3 days later." Patton looked out the tent flap at the frozen landscape. "A doctor does not run from the table when the lights flicker," he said. "She stayed because an officer's first duty is to the men who cannot stand on their own. The plan died in the snow, but those 118 soldiers are breathing today because one woman believed her oath meant more than an open road to the rear." He turned back to the table, his face carved from stone. "There are men in this army who wear polished boots and talk about courage while looking for a reason to find a safer ditch. Then there is a surgeon from Boston who looks at 32 seats and stays in a canvas tent to face an armored division with nothing but a white flag and a box of bandages. She did not ask for a medal. She did not ask for permission to survive. She simply did her job when everyone else was busy looking at the map for a way out." "You have 2 options," the general said, looking directly at the division commander. You will assemble every available officer in this sector at the clearing by noon tomorrow, or you will hand me your grease pencil and find a post in the logistics corps. Decide now." The assembly took place in the mud of the cleared field exactly at noon. Under the gray sky, 300 officers from the surrounding divisions stood in rigid formations, their breath misting in the freezing winter air. No one spoke. The only sound was the low idling of a single open-top utility vehicle parked at the center of the perimeter. Major O'Brien stood at the front of the line, her wool coat damp with melting snow, her face calm. General Patton stepped forward, his leather boots crunching heavily into the frozen slush as he walked toward the center of the gathering. He held a small leather case in his gloved hands. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at the surgeon who had stayed behind. The witnesses watched in absolute silence as Patton opened the case, took out the silver star, and pinned it directly to O'Brien's coat. The metal glinted against the dark fabric. The officers in the ranks remained perfectly still. The lesson clear to everyone present: there would be no retreats from duty in this army. There would be no abandonment of the wounded. The ceremony ended without a single trumpet blast, leaving only the sound of the wind blowing through the canvas tents. Major Catherine O'Brien remained in the medical corps until the end of hostilities in Europe, continuing to treat casualties through the final drive into Germany. When the war ended, she returned to her home in Boston, Massachusetts, and quietly resumed her career as a surgeon at a municipal hospital. She rarely spoke to her colleagues or her family about the freezing tents near Diekirch, or the 3 days she spent under German guard in the snow. Her hands remained steady, and she dedicated the rest of her life to training young residents in emergency trauma care before her death in 1982. The silver star she received from Patton remained inside its velvet box at the bottom of a dresser drawer, never displayed, but never forgotten. Captain Hans Richter survived the collapse of the Ardennes offensive, but his vanguard unit was completely cut off and destroyed during the Allied counterattack in January. He spent the remainder of the war in an American prisoner of war camp in Kansas, where he was forced to clear agricultural fields alongside regular conscripts. After his release in 1947, he returned to a ruined family estate in western Germany and lived out his years working as a clerk for a local timber merchant. He died in 1974, bitter about the collapse of the old order and the loss of his family's ancient titles. General Patton kept the official report of the Diekirch Field Hospital evacuation on his desk until his own death in December 1945. In a personal letter to his wife written just days after the event, he noted that the true spirit of an army is found not in the men who advance with tanks, but in the individuals who refuse to run when the line breaks. Some historians have argued that Major O'Brien's choice to remain with the wounded was a reckless violation of standard withdrawal procedures that risked the capture of vital medical staff. They contend that an officer's primary duty, under imminent threat, is to preserve operational personnel for future campaigns rather than gamble on the mercy of an advancing enemy vanguard. Others have argued the opposite, insisting that her absolute adherence to the rules of the Geneva Convention preserved the moral integrity of the medical corps and saved over 100 lives. What is certain is that the physical presence of an American doctor at the field facility compelled the advancing forces to honor the Red Cross emblem. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same, or would you have quietly filed the report away to avoid the public spectacle? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about what happens when the plan dies and the soldiers don't, make sure to subscribe.